Welcome, everybody, to the Beards and Bible podcast. My name is Josh. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Gabe Rutledge. Gabe, how you doing today, man?
I'm doing excellent. Yeah, just same old. Made it back from the island.
You did?
Yeah.
All in one piece.
Yeah, barely. Yeah, we actually paddled through some of the choppiest water I've ever paddled through. The following morning,
Wow.
that morning, we did the podcast episode about what did we do the podcast episode about?
I could tell it was riveting, and you remembered.
I don't remember what it's about.
We were talking about ghosts and
Yes,
spirit
thank you,
mediums and
thank you.
psychics, and yeah.
But yeah, I put Micah in my lap, and we had like all this camping gear in our boats, and we were paddling through like 3-foot chop that was like hitting our boats and lapping up.
Wow.
And hitting like the ocean spray was hitting us in the face and lapping into our boats. And then meanwhile, there's like big $1 million yachts like zooming by us. And yeah, I was actually quite nervous.
Yeah. Now, can all three of your boys can swim?
No, well, Micah can't, but they all had life jackets on. I made them like put the life jackets on, and we had about 1.5 miles that we had to cross under those conditions, and we got across and then had a delightful time at the beach and saw lots of dolphins.
Yeah, man. Did Stacy come pick you guys up at the beach?
Yeah, she came and picked us up, and we had we were gonna get food at a restaurant there at the beach, but then she was like, "Wait a second, I will swing by." There was a Culver's. Do you guys have Culver's?
Oh yeah,
okay.
Heck yeah, we got Culver's.
There's a Culver's on the way, and she's like, "Let me just get Culver's," and we just sit there on the beach and do it because the wait at the restaurant was super long. Just all the
Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah.
Everybody heard the word that you and I spread on the last podcast, how great it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went and started eating there. So that's how popular this podcast is.
Basically, yeah.
Just one shout out, one mention, it just goes viral.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah. So that's stupid. Hey, some of you guys may be watching us today because we're on the YouTubes. So you can see Gabe's amazing podcast room that we've alluded to many times.
Yes.
Gabe, there's some artifacts behind you. You've got a lantern.
Yeah.
You've got Florida Man.
Yeah, that's
Skunk Ape guy.
Yeah, that's what was his name? Oh, I'm blanking out.
Dave something?
Dave Sheely. Thank you.
Dave Sheely. Yeah.
The Skunk Ape Hunter.
Yeah, we'll talk about that next episode. So
yeah, and I've got some
You've got Uganda paintings from Uganda. Our friend Zach from Uganda.
Yeah,
I have a similar painting to that.
Yep, and I've got my death trap of a skateboard back here.
Your longboard?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel really insecure about my setup. I've got my guitar, you can see above me. That's all. And then I have throughout my back, and so somebody gave me a yoga ball to sit on. Or not a yoga ball, a medicine ball. I don't know what they call these things.
A hemorrhoid ball?
Yeah, a hemorrhoid ring to sit on.
Say that.
So this is like and then they taped this to my wall, and it's basically their way of saying, hey, you need to stretch because you don't need to throw your back out anymore. And then behind me, there's just a whiteboard with random scribble notes.
We can see the deepest, darkest secrets about Resurrection Weekend and what that's going to look like.
Oh, man. Yeah. So you can actually read those scribbles. That's from a staff meeting I had the other day. So
yeah, some of
Gabe's
them.
looking close.
Some of them.
So if you go on YouTube, you can see the insider secrets of the Experience Community Cannon County staff meetings.
Mm-hmm.
They're not that exciting.
And I must issue an apology from the get-go here about going on YouTube and people can see us.
We kind of have a face for radio, don't we? Both of us?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know what's going to happen with the YouTube thing. Maybe like 2 people watch it and other people try to, what do these guys look like? And they see us once and they go, oh, and back to audio podcasting.
I'm just picturing my mother-in-law like trying to figure out how to hit the play button on YouTube, and she's like the only one. But yeah, how are you doing? Anything new in your life?
Oh man, we're doing good, man. This is a busy time for us. We got baseball kicking up. Coaching my son's baseball team again this year, which is awesome. And then yeah, man, Resurrection Weekend is this weekend, and Passover is this weekend, and so it's just busy, really busy, but really good, man, really good. And actually, with Passover being this weekend, this marks our 2-year anniversary doing this podcast.
That's crazy. 2 years.
I know.
Golly, where did time go?
Well, we were in the midst of the strangest time in human history for a great portion of those 2 years, so that's where it went.
Yeah. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a weird 2 years. How many episodes do we have recorded so far?
This is, I believe, episode 52.
Okay.
So that would make sense if it's 2 years and we do one every other week, so 52 weeks in a year. So
Yeah,
a year's worth of content.
that's terrifying.
That's yeah, it is.
With a
It
lot of
is.
us on the internet talking.
That is. My goodness. Wow.
Mhm.
And it's cool. I've met some people recently that say they're listeners and got a chance to meet them recently. I got a chance to meet Sam, and she spoke on Saturday night how much she enjoyed the Bell Witch episode as she was in her kitchen cooking at night and it was dark and yeah, so that was fun. And there's somebody else that I met recently that is a listener, but it's really cool. I feel like this started as kind of just a pet project of Gabe and I during uh, COVID lockdowns, and this has kind of taken on a life of its own. So we're really, really grateful for the people that continue to make this podcast possible by listening and commenting and asking good questions. And yeah, so
Yeah,
thank you to
sometimes I'll have people be like, they come up to me and be like, "Hey, I've been listening to your podcast," and I'm like, "What podcast?" I'm like, "Oh yeah," and I'm like,
yeah.
it's
Yeah,
really
it's
funny.
kind of funny, man. It's like something that I feel like you and I just every few weeks we hop on and just talk about stuff that's interesting to us, and then other people, I guess, enjoy listening in. So
I
kind
think
of cool.
it's helped me. Like I had a kind of a paradigm shift, or like an epiphany, I guess. Like we're not doing this podcast to, yeah, we do answer questions. Yeah, we will provide biblical insight and explain things, but I think more than that, this podcast is to followers of Christ who are like just red-blooded guys who just offer commentary on things.
Mm,
Sometimes that commentary explains things and expounds on things and helps you understand things better. But sometimes I think it's just a genuine conversation we have about issues and topics. Um, Sometimes we leave it open ended with a question mark still, but
yeah.
I come into it sometimes with this like almost insecurity. Like I don't really know that much about the Bible. I don't really know that much about
Mm,
theology. But really, at the end of the day, it's just like, well, I'm just going to be myself, and I'm going to do my best. And if I still look like I'm struggling with this, or I haven't completely answered that, that's okay because that's what listeners, that's what viewers want to see as well.
yeah,
Is that
absolutely, man.
just like I think looking back over the past 2 years, if I could reflect for a moment, it's like
Mm, get get
the
pensive for a
yeah.
second. Mm.
Let me look up in the
Yes, we can add in post production some
yeah.
music.
One of the hardest two of the hardest episodes we ever recorded where I was like, even in the midst of recording the episode, I was like, I have no idea what to say, was the one we talked about Black Lives Matter stuff
Hmm.
and social justice and race stuff, and then immigration. Those are
Yeah,
two where
yeah.
I walked into the kitchen and Stacy would be like, "Hey, how did it go?" And I'd be like, "I have no idea if anything I just said made sense." Like I think I just confused myself more in this topic. And
Well, but I think that what I've heard from people is that people really appreciate that
mhm,
because that's where most people are with this stuff.
yeah,
Because we turn on the news, we turn on podcasts, and it seems like the talking heads seem to have arrived at this airtight, convenient, concrete answer on one side of the pendulum or the other.
mhm,
But there's a lot of people that are kind of left to go, man, I don't even know all the facts of this. Like, I know there's like a party that says you have to be on this side and a party says you have to be on this side, but there's a lot of people that are trying to make up their own mind and wrestle through these questions. And I think
mhm,
it's okay to just say that out loud and just say, hey, we're figuring this out too. Like, what we do know is that Jesus is Lord and he gave us his word and we're trying to follow him and we're trying to use his word as a guide to follow him. But a lot of these cultural issues we're figuring out in real time just like everybody else.
yeah,
And
yeah. And I would implore people, our lineage, you know, our faith coming from the people of Israel. Israel was given his name. He went from Jacob to Israel because Israel means to wrestle with God, to
mm,
strive with God. And that's our lineage, that's our heritage, is we should be people who are known to not just not have all the answers. You might have a lot of the answers and be able to give a reason for what you believe and the hope that you have, but you still are actively striving and wrestling. And I think that that's a good thing to do. In other words, if you ever come to a point where you're just like, oh yeah, I know all the answers and I don't have to struggle with this at all. I don't, you
Mm-hmm.
know, life is going to throw all kinds of crazy, confusing, morally challenging scenarios at you. And you have to sometimes really wrestle with scripture and wrestle with God over these things and think, what is the answer to this? And
Absolutely.
it's definitely a journey.
100%. Speaking of journeys, if there was a Journey song that talked about UFOs, that's when I would sing it. But I
Mm,
don't have a Journey song that talks about UFOs. Oh,
mm.
I do actually.
Really?
And it's to anybody who is a believer in UFOs.
Mhm.
Don't stop believing.
Mm.
That was the worst transition we've ever had
Yeah.
in 2 years of doing podcasts.
Mm. Quite like
But I don't even know what to say at this point, other than our topic today for exploring the paranormal part 2 is UFOs, Tom DeLonge, and
mm.
Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Uh, Gabe, Tom DeLonge,
Mm.
you're familiar with this guy?
Yeah, I mean, from way back in
I was about to
MTV
say
MTV
you're
2000.
familiar with this guy. Come
Yeah.
on, don't lie. We're both familiar with
Remember
this
Tom
guy.
DeLonge running down the street naked with his bandmates? That's
Yes,
yeah, that's my
yes.
frame of reference of Tom DeLonge. But no,
Exactly.
I have since gone back, and I knew that he quit Blink-182, and
Yeah.
I wasn't a huge fan of Blink-182, although I was pretty familiar with their music. But going back and
We had a
watching,
roommate who was very, very into
yeah, yeah.
Blink-182. Yeah.
But going back and watching Tom DeLonge being interviewed by Joe Rogan about UFOs, I was like, this is a completely different person.
Yes.
And then watching Travis Barker, the drummer for Blink-182, talk about Tom DeLonge on Joe Rogan's podcast as well,
Yeah.
was really interesting because Travis Barker, the drummer, is saying, "Oh yeah, this has been going on for years. Like even as we
Yeah.
were broke musicians traveling around the country, Tom DeLonge he's been obsessed with UFOs."
Yeah. Well, and it's for those of you who never listened to the band Blink-182, huge band in the 90s and early 2000s. They sold like 25 million records worldwide. They were all over MTV. And they had this reputation of kind of being just like super immature. Like one of their big songs was What's My Age Again?
Mhm,
Um, and so it was like really surprising to anybody familiar with Blink 182 that Tom DeLonge left the band to dedicate himself to pursuing the truth behind UFOs.
mhm,
So much so, he founded an organization called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences. And people were like saying, dude, this guy is probably on drugs. He's like lost it. But then something happened in 2019 that the United States Army Combat Capabilities Development Command approached To the Stars Arts and Academy and basically like started a cooperative research and development with Tom DeLonge's company,
mhm,
which anybody that like is familiar with this was like, oh, what? Because like if you watch the interviews with Travis Barker and Mark Hoppus, those other two
mhm,
bandmates, they would kind of just roll their eyes at Tom DeLonge's obsession with UFOs. Like this guy's just kind of nuts. And then it gets even weirder because after that, they released a number of videos showing what appears to be UFOs, and then the Pentagon responds by saying those videos are legitimate.
mhm,
And then I don't know if you saw this on the Joe Rogan interview. Tom DeLonge says that he was approached by top U.S. government officials confirming many of the things he and his organization had been saying and basically given access to like classified information.
mhm,
So, like, some really strange things started happening in April of 2020. Of course, everybody's on COVID lockdown. Uh, the news is covering COVID almost exclusively. So, there's a lot of things that got buried in the news um, during that time. And one of them is that the US government officially released and declassified the videos that To the Stars Arts and Academy, that's Tom DeLonge's organization, released,
mhm,
which is really interesting because To the Stars released this video. The government said, "Yeah, that's real." And then the government said, "Okay, here's the video," and they released it almost like retroactively. Like, okay, we can't cover this up anymore. And then in June 2020, there was a Senate hearing where Senator Marco Rubio basically requested all the video footage collected by the Navy and the Pentagon be released. And then there was this task force that was put together that basically was tasked with the job of standardizing and collecting and reporting sightings of what they're calling unidentified aerial phenomena. So UAPs, not really UFOs, but UAPs, but kind of the same thing.
Mhm.
And man, since then, it's kind of just been off to the races. Like, there are pictures and videos this task force is releasing and confirming, um, some of which the United States Navy released. I guess pyramid shaped objects hovering above the USS Russell. And the spokesperson for this task force, which is an office of the U.S. government, said, "I can confirm that the reference photos and videos were taken by Navy personnel." So, I mean, this is just getting nutty, right? I mean, this kind of is like something you'd see in a movie, but
Mhm.
this has been happening. A lot of this was buried in the news cycle because of COVID.
Mm.
But basically, this task force came out to say, and this was last year, that there were 143 UFOs or UAPs that were spotted between 2004 and 2021, and that 18 of them featured unusual movement patterns or flight characteristics. Um, that basically said, like, we don't have this technology. We don't know what these things are.
Mm.
So that's kind of nutty.
Yeah. It's like Nutty gone mainstream.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like, yeah, I was watching a 60 Minutes interview with some of these guys, and they were talking about like, you know, the 60 Minutes guy was kind of like downplaying some of it. But the people he was interviewing were like, no, this is legit. You know, there's some serious sightings, and then so like if you accept that as truth, you have a decision to make. Okay, if the U.S. government is not certain what these objects are that are zipping around, um,
Mhm.
what are they? And so then we then have a few decisions to make, and it's kind of like a flow chart that we kind of go through,
Right.
which we're going to kind of do in this podcast episode is
Yeah.
maybe help people walk through these different explanations and give them from a biblical worldview um, some words of caution,
Hmm.
you know, and go from there.
Absolutely. So if you're wondering, okay, what have we said so far? Here's what we know for sure. There was a for-profit company started by, of all people, the guy who ran down the street naked on MTV, Tom DeLonge, which is just probably the most bizarre piece of the puzzle. And this for-profit company, the For the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, claims to have intel and definitive proof of UFOs or UAPs. So then the government comes out and says, yes, yes, those are legitimate, and we're actually going to establish our own task force to standardize the collection and reporting of these things. Um, at least 18 of the ones that were reported, the U.S. government basically says, we don't know what these things are. We don't have this technology. These are phenomena that just unknown to man. So within that, there have been several theories and hypotheses about what these things could possibly be. And with Gabe, this is what we're going to talk about today. But there's a really good book. I'm gonna hold it up for those of you watching on YouTube. It's called "Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men," and it is a rational Christian look at UFOs and extraterrestrials. Really good. Hugh Ross, Kenneth Samples, and Mark Clark. And in the first chapter, they write about how there could be several explanations that are normal explanations, not paranormal explanations for UAPs.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the ones that they mention is that it could be misidentified natural phenomena. So things like comets, meteor swarms, the moon, stars, and planets. Um, so for a lot of people, when they would see Venus at maximum brightness, a lot of people thought that was a UFO. but it wasn't. It was just the planet Venus at certain times of the year. Unusual weather conditions, flocks of birds, and sometimes even big flocks of birds can carry with them phosphorescent dust on their bellies and wings. Swarms of flying insects, hot ionized gases, earth lights. That's basically luminous electrical events from low level earthquakes. Um, the Northern Lights. Some people have thought the Northern Lights were UFOs. And then something called sun dogs. That's lights on either side of the sun caused by atmospheric distortions. So some things that people look at and say, "Oh my gosh, we don't know what that is. We've never seen that before." There's actually a logical scientific explanation for that, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
It could also be misidentified man-made phenomena. So it could be balloons. That's meteorological or also passenger balloons. It could be military aircraft or unconventional aircraft or secret advanced technology. So a lot of what people thought were UFOs in the 50s and 60s, the US government came out later and said, no, we were actually testing military technology and that was top secret. And so nobody could know about it. It could be, this is really funny to me, advertising planes. I don't know why anybody would see a plane with a big sign behind it and be like, oh, a spaceship. Uh, artificial Earth satellites, hovering aircraft like a helicopter, blimps, rockets and rocket launches, kites, fireworks, lasers aimed at the clouds. Which
Mm.
when I read that, I was like, I'm gonna go buy a laser pointer and do that. That sounds
Mhm.
awesome. Or searchlights. So there are natural phenomena, whether that's man-made or whether that's meteorological, that could explain some of this, right?
Yeah.
But there's other things that we're going to look at that seem to be unexplainable.
Mhm.
What do you think about that? I mean, what have this been a topic you've ever explored or thought about, or
No,
even
I never
cynical
really
about it, or
to be honest, I've never really been interested in it until, I mean, this past week, it kind of been like a peak of interest that I've ever had in it.
yeah?
Although, let me tell this story and you can make what you will out of it. But when I was in the Florida National Guard, we would go out to this bombing range in the
Hmm.
middle of nowhere in Central Florida, and kind of the nearest town was Arcadia, Florida. And we would go out to this Air Force bombing range. And if you ever look at the satellite of this Air Force bombing range, you can see potholes all over. There's big giant targets that are miles in diameter in this bombing range. And we go out to this bombing range and we would have all these artillery pieces and stuff with us that we would tow out there. And you would spend the day firing artillery and practicing that kind of stuff. And then you would camp out next to your vehicle and wake up the next morning and do it all again. But anyways, I was a young private, so we're looking at like 20, 21 years old. We're out in Arcadia, Florida. There's no light pollution. It's just in the middle of nowhere. We had been firing 105 howitzers, which were like from Vietnam.
Hmm.
Um, but we from the Vietnam War. But I'm sleeping out next to a Humvee on the ground, and I remember I had a poncho over top of me, and it was kind of like wet from the dew. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I had to go to the bathroom. So I walk, about 15 feet away into some palmetto bushes, and I look up in the night sky, and the stars are like super bright and vibrant. And granted, I'm really groggy, but I see a single light way out in the distance, like up, like where a passenger jet would be,
Hmm.
and it is in the sky, and it's just zigzagging back and forth, like to that
Wow.
that speed right there, like covering in one zigzag, like miles and miles, just going like that.
Hmm.
And I was just like, okay, I'm really tired. I'm just gonna go back to sleep. And and the next morning, I was talking to my buddy of mine who was another private, and I was like, "Hey, dude, you won't believe what I saw last night." And I explained it to him. He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "I woke up and I did the same thing at a different. I saw the same thing."
What?
Yeah, and he was really freaked out by it as well.
Yeah, man.
Um, but yeah, and I thought about it, and I mean, it's been 25 years since that moment, but I'm like, that is, and I've gone through and kind of like thought rationalize in my mind, maybe it was just this or maybe it was that, and
Mhm.
I can't come up with a good explanation. I'm not like a conspiracy theorist. I don't,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
there was something that I just cannot explain. I have no
Sure.
idea.
Well,
So,
and the more you dive into this subject, and the more you find there's actually a lot of reports just like that.
mhm,
But most of the people that have had experiences like that are very embarrassed and ashamed, a little hesitant to share them
yeah,
because the community of people that have said we believe in UFOs have basically been the subject of public ridicule
mhm,
since the 1940s and 50s.
yeah,
And a lot of this came through, TV, through films, through media. And some people would actually argue that that has been an intentional effort on the part of, media corporations to really discredit their claims and kind of keep everything
yeah,
tight-lipped and hush-hush to where anybody that has an encounter like that doesn't want to say anything because they're like, people are going to think I'm crazy.
mhm,
People are going to think I'm nuts, right? Um, but man, if you really do a deep dive into this subject, like there are so many claims of experiences like the one you had that go back all the way. I mean, some of them go back to ancient times, but really since the 40s and 50s, there's been a lot
mhm,
very similar to that.
yeah,
So there's a guy named J. Allen Hynek, and he wrote a book in 1972 called The UFO Experience. And he gave basically a six-fold classification for how to understand UFO sightings. So they would be arranged basically according to the proximity, like how close you got.
mm,
So the first level would be nocturnal lights. So basically lights in the night sky. So according to Hynek, Gabe, you had an encounter with the UAP.
mhm.
Yeah, give yourself a gold star. But it's just the first level. You didn't get close enough to
No, yeah,
actually. Yeah. So nocturnal lights would be kind of the first level. Daylight discs would be seeing a UFO in the daytime. And most people that have reported that have said it had kind of an oval or a disc shape.
hmm,
The next level would be radar visual. So somebody on a radar can basically confirm, yes, this is a real object. Uh, but sometimes that can be discredited because of atmospheric anomalies that happen in radar. But then you start getting into the close encounter category. So he gives us a close encounter of the first kind, second kind, third kind, and then people have added the fourth and fifth kind. And we'll kind of talk through some of those. So a close encounter of the first kind would be a visual sighting of an identified flying object less than 500 feet away that shows kind of the detail of whatever it is you're seeing. What's crazy is if you really start studying these close encounters of the first kind, um, apparently in World War II, it was very common for pilots, both on the side of the Axis fighters and the Allied fighters, to see round glowing fireballs as they would go up to fly on missions, and they called these like balls of fire that they would just see Foo Fighters.
hmm.
Which when I read that, I was like, dude, that's the coolest thing ever, right? Because that's where the band got the name, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but it was like a really common thing. There were 2,000 reports collected with these Foo Fighters. So if they would go up in the sky to fly on a mission, there'd be these like balls that would fly alongside these planes. People would try to figure out what it is. They would say maybe that's St. Elmo's fire, which is like a meteorological phenomena that even sailors used to report on. Some would say it's the planet Venus they're seeing and reflections from the planet Venus. Some people even said it was hallucinations from oxygen deprivation that pilots were experiencing, which is crazy. That's not how hallucinations work. Like, you, not everybody has the same hallucination, right?
mhm, yeah,
And then finally, people said, no, it's secret weapons from the Germans, but the German pilots were seeing it too.
mm,
So it's pretty, that's pretty noteworthy, I think.
yeah,
You got 2,000 reports throughout World War II, just a common thing. Pilots are all seeing the same kind of unexplained aerial phenomena, and nobody quite knows what it is. It's interesting.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think like how you deal with that information is, that kind of that. So in other words, like the government coming out and saying, okay, yeah, there are UAPs. Um, how we process that information that we've just been given makes a world of difference.
Sure. Yeah, and really, I think at that time, that was not common knowledge, right? I mean, there were
Mhm.
bigger fish to fry than trying to figure out what a Foo Fighter was, right? I mean,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
had two civilizations trying to take over the world, and so it's kind of like we got to stop Nazi Germany, we got to stop the Empire of Japan. We don't really have time to try to figure out what these things are.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, how you process that was really left up to the pilots. I mean, it was just kind of like, okay, what it doesn't really matter what they are, but we got other things to do. And then in 1947, there was a civilian pilot who flew around Mount Rainier in the U.S. and he reported seeing 9 objects flying in a formation, and he described them looking like saucers. And this was kind of the first account that really we know of kind of that term flying saucer.
Mm.
And that was again 1947. So really in the 1950s and 60s, that's when people really started using that term flying saucers. And it was kind of from that account. And then of course the most famous incident, if you live here in the US, was the Roswell incidents in 1947, Roswell, New Mexico, where there was a what later was confirmed by the US Army Air Force to be a weather balloon. But I think because of people coming back from the war, hearing about reports of Foo Fighters, because of the earlier incident that year of the flying saucers, people's imaginations were very fertile, and so people started saying, "Oh, it was flying saucers. There was recovered aircraft," and so a lot of conspiracy theories formed around that. Even people going so far as to say there were alien autopsies that were performed there
Mm.
near Roswell. None of that's been confirmed. Um, but I think it is significant just to say that the public imagination was really just at a fever pitch because of some of the things going on at that time. And then when you start getting into what was happening in Europe, there was an incident called the Rendlesham Forest incident in Suffolk, England, in late December of 1980. And there were several hundred reported sightings of unexplained lights. Like several hundred people in this part of England started saying, "We saw the same kind of unexplained aerial phenomena. We don't know what this is. It all kind of looks the same." There was all kind of a shared narrative by several people of that. In France, there was the Venansol UFO incident in 1965. There was another incident in 1981. In 1965, there was a UFO incident in Pennsylvania called the Kecksburg UFO incident. And then one I thought that was really interesting. This is more recent. This is 1997. There were in the city of Phoenix, Arizona, thousands of people. This is March 13th, 1997. Claimed to see V-shaped lights flying in formation over like a 300-mile range.
Mm.
So you can actually go online. You could type in the Phoenix lights and look up videos and look up uh, pictures. And to what we know of, to our knowledge, is the U.S. government later came out and said, "Hey, some of that was us," but then some of that they have no explanation for.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever seen. Let me look up a photo of the Phoenix lights.
Yeah,
See.
it's super interesting just to kind of see
Oh
how a
yeah,
lot.
I have seen photos or video of this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Interesting. Hmm.
wasn't really picked up on by major news outlets. It was more like fringe news. Again, there's been like this huge effort, I think, by mainstream media to ridicule anybody who acknowledges the possibility of this stuff.
Hmm.
Basically, say people are crazy if you acknowledge that there might be some possibility. So there's this huge public stigma on this. But when you really start looking at it, man, there's been thousands of people in about a 60-year period that have all said we've had legitimate experiences that we can't explain.
Hmm.
And so, like, what do you do with that, right?
Hmm. Mhm. Yeah. And I don't know, maybe the U.S. government might be embarrassed by that or doesn't want people to panic or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of it's a national security threat, I would say. So like they don't want the U.S. public to think, why do they have this technology and we don't?
Right.
I don't know, but I'm not sure the motivation behind it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of unanswered questions as to why the government basically kept denying these things for a long, long time, and up until recently. And I say recently, like the last 2 years.
Hmm.
Like up until recently, the government basically was very tight-lipped, or would go on a smear campaign against people who claim to believe UFOs, or come out and say, "Hey, all this is just classified
Hmm.
stuff, right? You guys don't
Yeah.
need to know. We're just trying to keep you safe, right?" So, I mean, like we said earlier, there's a lot of possible explanations for these. It could be man-made phenomena like satellites, government testing, weather balloons, yada yada yada. Could be misidentified natural phenomena like meteorological stuff going on, planets, yada yada yada. It could also be hoaxes. I mean, such was the case of Nessie,
Hmm.
Loch Ness monster, a lot of some of that stuff, and we'll get into that next week when we talk about cryptids. Um, but I mean, you see that in Roswell. There's some very imaginative and delusional people that were just trying to make money,
Hmm.
and so they just sort of embellished some of these things. So those are all explanations. Or the third explanation that we're going to explore a little bit is these things could be legitimate non-human entities. That's a possible explanation. Not saying it is,
Hmm.
but just saying that's possible, right?
Yeah, like I kind of have to go there because some of the testimony I've seen from like fighter pilots and stuff, Navy fighter pilots, what they say about these sightings is that they interact with the
Hmm.
person who is observing them or the aircraft that is observing them. They respond to stimuli, which is one of the characteristics of life, is that you
Right.
respond to outside stimuli. Um, so so here we're going to split into, is this human life or non-human life?
Right.
And
Right.
that's
Right.
where
Right.
you kind
Right.
of have to, that's so we're at that point of the flow chart of,
Right.
okay, is so we're past whether or not this is real. Now we're like, okay, if these are real, is it human life or non-human life?
Or yes, another way to look at that is it extraterrestrial life
Hmm.
or is it something else?
Hmm. Hmm.
Right. So I mean, it could be human life or non-human life. Um, that split, right?
Yeah.
But it could also be intelligent life from another
Yeah. So I
planet.
would say that that falls in the category of non-human life.
Right. Okay. So there's kind of two hypotheses for, if UAPs are legitimate non-human entities, right? There's two main hypotheses. One is it's extraterrestrial life, so life from another planet, and the other is it's an interdimensional being.
Mm.
That's where it gets really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So, if you acknowledge this possibility that UAPs might be legitimate non-human entities, then you really have to just import a worldview into that possibility to explain what those entities might be. And really, if you start researching where we have been just culturally over the past 50 or 60 years, there has been this predominant worldview that has fueled the quest to connect with extraterrestrial life.
Hmm.
And that worldview is really Darwinist evolution.
Hmm.
And that worldview basically says intelligent life and humanity evolved here on Earth as the product of random chance because there's nothing special or unique about Earth. Earth got lucky, right?
Hmm.
So chance, if the luck of the draw led to life evolving here, then most certainly it has to exist somewhere else. And so the thought process is that even though we as human beings have no evidence whatsoever that life exists in other planets and other galaxies, it has to, right? And if you ask why, it's well, because it exists here because of evolution. There's no such thing as a creator God. There's no such thing as, an architect of human life. It's just chance. So if no one plus nothing equals everything we see here on Earth, then why would life not exist in other places?
Mhm.
So then the quest becomes we have to prove that life exists on other planets, that intelligent extraterrestrial life is out there, because if we can prove that, then science wins, religion is antiquated and old fashioned, we can achieve progress and finally rid ourselves of these silly ideas about God.
Hmm.
So for a lot of people, that's the quest to prove extraterrestrial life. And kind of the godfather of that was a guy named Carl Sagan.
Mhm.
He had a TV show called Cosmos, and he wrote the novel Contact, which they made into a movie starring Jodie Foster. Does that make sense? I mean, can you kind of
Mhm.
see that undercurrent behind
Yeah.
this quest to prove extraterrestrial life?
Yeah, and, you can see that in the Tom DeLonge interview with Joe Rogan, kind of he while he's saying one thing in his facial expression and his eyes, you can see a longing for something else, and I think that
Mm,
longing for him is a connection with like, the origin, with a connection
right.
with the divine, with something higher and beyond himself. Because he's no doubt a really deep thinking, intelligent human being
Hmm.
who thinks has to grapple with these big questions of like, where did I come from and why am I here?
Right.
And Richard Dawkins attempts to kind of answer those questions as well with his theories about being intelligent, designed by extraterrestrial beings as well.
Hmm.
And it's like we all have to we have to try to answer these questions of where did we come from. And then I think there's in every human this desire to connect with something that's beyond ourselves. Even if we are a raging atheist, we still long for for that connection to our origin, to our past, or to something smarter than us. And you kind
Right.
of see that in the Tom DeLonge interview a little bit.
Almost like a desire for transcendence.
Yeah, thank you, thank you,
Yeah.
thank you for taking what I was trying to say over the course of 3 minutes and spitting it out.
No, 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 no. No, I think in us that we want to know that life is more than just survival.
Mhm, mhm,
We want to know there's some sort of a grand architecture going on.
mhm,
And I would say that even like what makes it so interesting about kind of where we are culturally is perhaps the generation before us, guys like Carl Sagan and Richard Dawkins, were interested in extraterrestrial life as a kind of in their minds they thought that was a checkmate against Christianity and religion, right?
mhm, mhm,
But you see in some of the guys we're going to talk about here in a minute, like Stephen Greer and Tom DeLong, like they're kind of open to like this weird spirituality
mhm.
that basically is stating like, yeah, I mean, this proves there's no such thing as a Christian God, but there's some sort of a life force out there, right?
Yeah.
Which kind of gets into some nuttier spirituality that's a little bit concerning and troubling on its own, you know?
Well, it's yeah, uh, I would say that secularism as a way of looking at our origins, a way of looking at our reality, has done so many people wrong, and a lot
Hmm.
of people realize that and are leaving that. And some commentators would say, and um, philosophers would say that we're leaving secularism and we're entering what we will look back at and call post secular era.
Yeah,
In other
I could see
words,
that. Yeah.
yeah, we're entering a new spiritual era where we are all saying, yeah, no, secularism doesn't make any sense whatsoever. We cannot
Right.
have come from nothing. There has
Hmm.
to be something that formed us. And so then you'll see people spin off into these things like, doing DMT and other
Hmm.
psychedelics
Hmm.
and looking for extraterrestrial life and all these other things. And they're looking ultimately to try to answer that question of origin.
Right. Yeah. So for those who still hold to that secular material worldview,
Hmm.
there's a ton of leaps of logic going on. And the first is, why would the existence of life on other planets prove the non existence of God?
Hmm.
Why would it prove the theory of Darwinian evolution? If there was a God out there, couldn't the God just create life on other planets as well? Um, And let's just say the operators of UFOs or UAPs are really non-human entities. Why would they have to be from other planets? Like, why would they have to be extraterrestrial? What's to say they
Mhm.
couldn't be spiritual or interdimensional beings that have always been with us?
Mhm.
Right. So I think your worldview comes in
Mhm.
to interpret phenomena you're seeing, and I think that happens a lot with people that see this. Um, so back to kind of the scale that we talked about, the Hynek scale of we said there's seeing uh, nocturnal lights, seeing daylight discs, seeing radar visual, seeing close encounters of the first kind, which are you see a some sort of an aircraft or spacecraft, 500 yards away from it, 500 meters away from it, and then you start getting into more close encounters, and this is where things kind of get more and more bizarre and absurd and a little bit troublesome, just from a spiritual sense. There's close encounters of the second kind. This is where people encounter a UAP or UFO event in which a physical effect is alleged. So, animals reacting, physiological effects such as paralysis or heat or discomfort in the witness, like a physical trace, impressions in the ground, scorched or otherwise affected vegetation, or a chemical trace. And if you start researching that and reading testimonies of people who have alleged to have encountered UFOs, it seems like most of them will say that there was like a feeling of darkness and a feeling of terror and a
Mm.
feeling of almost being like violated
Mm.
after they see that, which is very interesting just
Mm.
from a spiritual standpoint.
It is, yeah.
So that's from the second kind. And then there's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which, if you're a movie buff, you've probably heard of that movie. Steven Spielberg released this movie in 1977. Actually, funny story. J. Allen Hynek, the creator of this scale, had a cameo in that movie.
Hmm.
So, you ever see that movie?
No, I haven't. What's the name of
Oh,
it?
dude, it's a good movie. Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
No, I haven't. It's Steven Spielberg?
Yeah,
Oh,
man, it's a
okay.
great movie. Yeah.
My brother-in-law and I have a running joke that he's a big movie guy, and literally every time he asks me, "Have you ever seen this movie?" I'm always like, "No, I haven't seen the movie." Like, I just don't watch a lot of movies, and he's like, "Have you seen this?" And he's like, "Oh, no, you haven't seen that." He'll like stop himself mid-question and be like, "Why am I even
Yeah.
asking this question?" Yeah, but
What's really interesting in the movie, the movie basically tells a story of all these people from random parts of the world that are having these experiences where they're seeing the same place. Like
Mhm.
they're all like they encountered nocturnal lights, or they encountered, close encounters of the first kind. They saw some sort of a craft, and then after that they all were just like mesmerized, and in their minds they couldn't get over this like hill that they just kept seeing. Like one guy
Weird.
just like every time he sits down for dinner and he has mashed potatoes, he's like sculpting a hill out of mashed potatoes. Like seriously, in the movie that's what it is. And then you see these people communicating with extraterrestrial life through music. So um there's like a certain song, like a certain scale that they're playing like on a keyboard, and that's how they communicate with
Interesting.
yeah, it's super interesting, but all of it is again based on like the scale, the Hynek scale. But
Hmm.
so close encounters of the third kind would be someone that encounters a UFO that they actually encounter an animated entity.
Okay.
So a humanoid, a robot, or a human that seems to be the pilot or an occupant of the UFO.
Interesting.
And again, these are really fringy testimonies. If you start getting into the close encounters of the third kind, you can't really verify this. You just basically have people that say this happened to them, and you're like, okay, that's your word versus anybody else's word, right?
Yeah. Well, hey, speaking of space movies, there's
Space
one.
Jam. Great movie. Yeah.
Here, let me read a description of one. This
Okay.
is this is a 1984 film, and see how fast you can get it. After
Okay.
finally achieving a high score on this arcade game, his favorite everyday teenager Alex Rogan meets the game's designer Centauri, who reveals that he created this game as a training ground for developing and recruiting actual pilots to help fight a war in space. Whisked
Oh,
away from the banality of his trailer park life to a distant alien planet,
uh,
Alex struggles to use his video game playing skills to pilot a real ship with real lives at stake.
is it Tron?
No. Good
Is
guess
it
though.
War Game?
No.
Is it The Wiz?
It's
Not The Wiz.
the last Starfighter. Did you ever see that?
No,
Have
I
you
didn't
not
see
seen that?
that.
Oh man.
Who is that? Is that what I'm thinking of the one
It's
with Matthew
Nick
Broderick.
Castle, director Nick Castle,
Who's
starring
the
Lance Guest, Dan O'Herlihy.
I
Yeah,
missed that one.
$29 million budget.
All wasted, right?
Yeah.
2 stars on IMDb. I never saw that one. I gotta look
Okay.
that up. That's good. So yeah, that's in Close Encounter with the Third Kind. You don't really, again, see too many verified of that. But the next scale is kind of where things get a little bit nuttier, and that is Close Encounters of the Fourth Kind is essentially an alien abduction. Hynek
Here's where the probes come out.
exactly. Hynek never actually put this encounter on his scale because, again, there were no verified accounts of this other than just people's words, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then since then, more and more people have started coming out and saying that they have had these experiences. And really, like, most of the people that have these experiences talk about really absurd, hallucinatory, and very dreamlike events
Mm-hmm.
where they'll have an encounter with an entity that captures them. And then there's a lot of like examination and procedures. Like you said, here come the probes, right? That's actually a very common theme.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's really interesting is like if we're believing extraterrestrial life is highly evolved life forms from other planets, wouldn't they have superior medical uh, technology? But a lot of people that talk about, I have been abducted, talk about almost like being assaulted, like sexually
Mm-hmm.
assaulted, like in a really cruel and bizarre and crass way.
Mm-hmm.
I know that sounds really weird, but that's a pretty common theme. Then they usually have reports of these beings conferencing with them, speaking with them, a lot of times telepathically.
Hmm.
These people kind of touring the captor's vessel, whatever the spacecraft is. Most people experience like this loss of time where they just kind of they're in this dreamlike hallucinatory state where they just kind of lose all track of time. And then when they return, a lot of people talk about having like injuries and bruises and they feel violated, they have disheveled clothing. But then they feel like this kind of strange high and profound sense of like they had this mystical experience, like they have a oneness with like this god or this universe or even their abductors. But then what's interesting is anybody that's reported this talks about how they have like these really traumatic psychological, physical, and social aftermath after that.
Hmm.
So that's really interesting. People that have had those experiences. And again, we can't verify that because again, it's people's word versus anybody else's. There's nothing to prove that actually happened to people. But it is pretty noteworthy to say that almost all of them have a shared narrative. And the fruit of that narrative is never like seems to not be that positive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what do you make of that?
Oh, I have no idea. That's I just have no idea. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I don't have a category for that, I guess.
If
And I don't
someone from your church came to you and said, Pastor Gabe, this happened to me, what would you say to them?
man, I have no idea. And I honestly I don't have a category for that.
Yeah.
I I you know, I don't want to dismiss it, but at the same time
Mhm.
I don't want to add credence to it.
Right.
But I guess yeah, I have no idea. I just pray that that doesn't happen anytime
Yeah,
soon.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What
So,
would you do? What would you say?
well, I mean, I'm probably going to let the cat out of the bag. I don't believe that Anybody that has an experience like that, let's just say that's a legitimate experience, I would say,
Mhm.
okay, let's just talk. Why would extraterrestrial life do that to you?
Mhm.
Like, why you, number one? And why would they sexually assault you?
Mhm.
Why would they do anything? So I got to go back to my Bible. I got to read the book of Genesis, chapter 6, where it talks about the sons of God found the angels or the daughters of men attractive, and they went into them. So we see in the book of Genesis, and we see kind of an ancient Hebrew understandings that the spiritual beings were interested in violating humanity
Mhm.
and having real physical contact with humanity as a way to deceive them and violate them and corrupt them. And Jesus said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man.
Mm.
So this is just me. And again, this is
Mhm.
somebody listening to this go, okay, come on, this guy's a nut. I would say if somebody came to me that had an experience like that and they talk about how they felt traumatized, they were sexually assaulted, they felt, just like this euphoria and this sense of like just hallucination, I would say, man, you had a spiritual experience. You didn't have an experience with an extraterrestrial.
Mm. But, yeah, I like that answer. My only objection, I'm just kind of like I'm honestly curious, is like, was the were the encounters in Genesis with the fallen angels and Nephilim and
Hmm.
human beings, was that a spiritual experience or was that a physical experience?
See, I don't know. Maybe both.
Yeah, so, like, I mean, what if like, you tell a young woman that and she's like, "Well, am I going to experience childbirth after this?" It's just is this gonna lead to what I'm saying? Like, that's
Yeah, I don't know, man.
I
I
don't wanna
probably wouldn't pull out the book of Genesis and go, "Hey,
yeah, I don't
this
wanna
just happened," right?
so someone who is coming to me is saying that mentally there's a lot going on there. Like,
Oh
there's a
yeah,
lot of instability, whether that's, like, legitimate or not, like, I guess I would be like, "Okay, let me open the pages of Genesis chapter 6 and read to you about this Nephilim thing." I don't want them to think, "Okay, I'm pregnant with an alien baby." Like,
yes.
because
No,
that's
I
gonna
get what you're
open,
saying.
like, a
Yeah,
whole other can of worms.
I get what you're
But
saying.
I agree. I think that that's a pretty good, like, between me and you, and I guess whoever's listening, like, that
The several hundred people who are listening to this. Yeah,
that's a pretty good explanation from a biblical worldview that this is likely a spiritual encounter from a demonic entity,
yeah,
and the Bible makes room for that.
sure. So
Um,
again, but like what we're saying is not everybody who reports a close encounter of the fourth kind actually had a close encounter of the fourth kind,
right,
right?
right. Yeah.
Some people could be mentally ill and have
Mhm,
a delusion. Some people could be creating a hoax to make a lot of money off of this because a
mhm.
lot of people have done that. Um,
Or could be like a chemical reaction to a drug they took,
yeah, who knows, right?
hallucination.
But if someone legitimately claims to have had an experience like that, and the aftermath of that experience, the aftermath of that is, man, they feel like they were assaulted, they feel like they were
Mhm,
violated, they feel like they're in a dream state, they feel like everything's just, they don't know what's up, what's down. I would say, okay, then let's talk. Like there's something spiritual happening here, right?
mhm,
And and I think that's when my worldview comes into it. But I think if we really start lifting the hood on this stuff, especially as we get into the next category of alien encounters, or excuse me, UAP encounters, it starts getting into the occult and it starts getting into the new age.
mhm,
Like there is a link now to this point. Once pass the hey, there's lights in the sky, and it starts getting into well, I encountered an actual being.
mhm,
Then you start delving into the world of the occult.
mhm,
So, a close encounter of the fifth kind, again, Hynek never put this on a scale, this has only come out recently, is where people claim to be able to have direct communication between extraterrestrials and humans. And this is where we get into the world of the occult, primarily. The leading expert on this right now is a guy by the name of Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. Um, he claims that he had a experience with a UAP at close range when he was 18, and then another experience at 35. He got trained, though, and this is very interesting and noteworthy. He got trained in transcendental meditation,
Hmm.
and he served as a director of a meditation organization. And he founded in 1990 a Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. Um, and basically, he claims to have over 3,000 confirmed reports of um, UFO sightings by pilots and 4,000 of traces, so close encounters of the second kind. But his organization teaches how to basically initiate contact and communicate with extraterrestrials through meditation.
Hmm. That's a little
And
sus.
yeah, a little bit, right? So he offers, I looked it up. I went on, you can actually, this is, don't do it, but there's an app you can download. Stephen Greer has an app, and you can hop on his app, and his app teaches you how to initiate contact with supposed extraterrestrials.
Hmm.
This is how dedicated he is to it. He wants to get 1% of the population of Earth to meditate and make contact, to basically get the attention of what he sees are extraterrestrials, which
Interesting.
is crazy. Like, that's his goal, right? And so, to that end, man, his organization offers seminars, so you can sign up. And I got this off their website. One of their weekend long seminars, he claims to provide a deeper understanding of the science of consciousness, interdimensional travel, how we can communicate with other interstellar beings using ancient practices and modern technology. And he's kind of started being a little bit mainstream because the singer Demi Lovato is apparently a really huge fan.
Hmm.
She she makes me laugh because she's, oh man, bless her heart. She went on recently and said that it's intolerant to call extraterrestrials aliens.
Hmm.
She's on a campaign to make sure we don't call them aliens anymore because that would hurt their
That's,
feelings, right?
mhm.
Yeah, they're extraterrestrials.
I know what would hurt Demi Lovato's feelings is the fact that I've never heard of Demi Lovato. I don't know who Demi Lovato even is. I'm trying to like.
She's a singer. I don't even know what she's saying, man. Like, I guess she's. Let me look on Spotify what she's saying. Let's see if you've heard
Demi
any of the songs.
Lovato.
Let's
Like
see.
I'm still in like Amy Grant. You know what I'm
Just
saying?
okay, yeah. This is coming from a guy that never
Carmen.
seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
I know.
Demi Lovato. That's
Well,
pulling up on Spotify.
that's interesting. I mean, there's so much entertainment and media being pumped out that involves extraterrestrial entities and encounters and visits and I mean even love affairs. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, we joke and stuff about like having alien babies, but like, do you think there could be straight up demonic manifestations that masquerade as being um, extraterrestrial beings here to cure all of humanity's woes
Absolutely.
and being like half human, half whatever? I mean, like, I could see how if if we keep if we stay on the entertainment trajectory that we're on,
Hmm.
if that were to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, humanity would be like, oh, okay, yeah. Humanity would be like,
Hmm.
yeah, we do need fixing, and we have been waiting for you.
Right.
And we would just give them all the keys of power,
Hmm.
um, and that would be obviously uh, catastrophic because if this is a demonic entity from the pits of hell, then that would mean the ruin of. But I don't know. Obviously,
Yeah.
we know the end of the story, and it's not.
Sure. So, like, there's this huge leap of logic going on with Stephen Greer, Demi Lovato, anybody that's into this whole Close Encounter of the Fifth Kind, right?
Mhm.
That we initiate contact with extraterrestrials through meditation and through inviting contact. And the leap of logic is this: every entity that we encounter is from another planet,
Mm.
right? That's a massive leap of logic.
Yeah.
Why couldn't they be something else? I mean, these people are acknowledging the reality of a spiritual realm
Mhm.
and saying that these extraterrestrials have tapped into that spiritual realm. But what if they're not extraterrestrials? What if they're beings that have always been with us in the spiritual realm here on Earth,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Um, then you start getting into this weird thing of the occult of like, anybody that takes place in psychedelics and in DMT and in astral projection will verify that once you get into that world, there are malevolent beings that want to destroy you and deceive you.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when you start dabbling in this world of meditation and inviting contact telepathically with these beings,
Mhm.
man, you're opening the door for that stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously, from the biblical worldview, like just a few things from the biblical world. First of all, if it is verified that there is life on other planets, that would not discredit biblical Christianity in any sense. Like, God would still be creator, Jesus would still be savior and Lord. There'd be lots of theological considerations for that because we have to ask, okay, are these beings still made in the image and likeness of God?
Mhm.
Right? Would these beings need redemption from a fall?
Mhm.
And we would understand that God would have made a way for them to be in relationship with him if they were made in his image and likeness, right? I mean, like God's
Mhm.
good and God's big enough to do that, right? So there are no ways that discredit biblical Christianity. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Yeah, and I think it's like you have to ask yourself, did they fall into the realm of Romans 8 where all things are subjected to the frustration, the creation is being frustrated because of the fallenness of man.
Yeah,
And I would say that yeah, they would fall into that realm that
right.
they need redemption from our fallenness
Yeah.
being part of creation.
Yeah.
Because I
So
mean, even if you accept that they're from another planet, which I personally don't accept that. If we did, if we physically observed one of these entities leaving Mars and heading towards us, and we're like, okay, yeah, they live on Mars, it's undeniable.
yeah,
Then we have to um, tell ourselves, yeah, um, that is a created entity. That doesn't negate the fact that there. It doesn't. In other words, it doesn't do away with the necessity of a creator
yeah,
and a lawgiver and a judge.
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, to be honest, if you start reading the science, and again, there's an awesome chapter in this book, and Hugh Ross wrote in this book that we talked about earlier, The Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. He talks about life on other planets. Man, they are trying their darndest in these secular societies where they come from a Darwinistic evolution perspective to prove that Earth is not exceptional and life can exist on other planets. And through satellites and through the Hubble telescope and through all these things, they're trying as hard as they know how to prove life is sustainable on other planets. And they're coming up empty.
Mm,
So, like, the mathematical possibility for life like ours to exist on other planets is, I mean, almost impossible,
mhm,
right? So, I mean, I could be wrong. We could be wrong as humans if we say, man, there's no such thing as life on other planets. We could be wrong. But the more the science comes back, kind of seems like we're it.
mhm,
I mean, truly, right? Which is so funny that so many people that claim to be scientific say, no, it has to.
mhm,
Well, if you're starting with a premise and then going in trying to prove your premise, that's the opposite of science.
mhm,
Right?
mhm,
Science is observation. All the observation is pointing to we're alone. We're it. And I think that proves the biblical worldview to say, man, we are the crown jewel
mm,
of creation. We are made in the image and likeness of God. Um, so I would say, like, no, that there isn't alien life. There is humanity, and there's angels, and there's demons.
mm,
So I think another question we have to ask if we're looking at the biblical worldview is what's the fruit of these encounters? Like when
mm,
someone has a close encounter of the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth kind, or they see lights in the sky, if you read a bit about these experiences, most of the fruit of these encounters is really either an obsession with trying to discover a reality out in the universe that would disprove the existence of God and discredit Christianity,
mm,
or the other fruit is anxiety, darkness, terror, physical and mental trauma and other really, really dark stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, confusion. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that's significant to really think about. Um, so I think we could just kind of leave it at this. Could it be that many who believe these extraterrestrials that they're encountering, that they're seeing in the sky, that they're encountering through meditation, they're summoning through medium, they're actually just demonic beings that are masquerading as something else to try to
Mm.
confuse humanity and lead them away from Creator God?
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I think that there may be technologies that are developing worldwide that we don't know about, and that our
Absolutely.
government is suppressing the knowledge of because
Hmm.
of their, whatever motivation. But I think that our curiosity as humans and our intrigue about the supernatural realm can be hijacked by the supernatural realm.
Sure.
And so you could, demonic realm might piggyback on that
Hmm.
curiosity and hijack, but yeah, it's a really fascinating topic, and one I think we just barely scratched the surface
Oh,
on.
of course. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm always hesitant to like even go into these topics and stuff because I never want conspiracy theorists annoy me. I am such a skeptic, and I'm like,
Yes.
and it's like a lot of the conspiracy theories that are out there are just completely fruitless and
Hmm.
do nothing that we're
Right.
completely powerless in many of these things. Like we talked in the past about the deep state and stuff. It's like, okay, yeah, what if all that is true? What are we going to do about it?
Exactly.
If you really believe the United States government is that nefarious, then where are you going to go? What are you going to do? You going to move? No, you're not. You're going to sit right there on your couch and you're going to keep watching YouTube. Like
It's
really, like that's the end of the day.
Cheeto dust gathering on your neck beard.
Yeah, like you're not
Yeah.
going to do anything about it, and you're powerless to affect any change.
Right.
And meanwhile, your kids are, missing their quality time with their parent because they're so obsessed with these different things. So
Right.
I get really annoyed at conspiracy theorists.
Me too.
But so I hope that this episode doesn't drive you towards conspiracy theories, but
Mm-mm.
drives you towards the Word of God, and the Word of God will drive you towards living holy and set apart and raising godly families and children and disciples.
Absolutely.
I hope that's what that does.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, everybody's got to settle in their mind. If you feel led to settle in your mind what these experiences people claim to have are,
Hmm.
um, and you come to the conclusion that I think I have come to, and that is, some of it's government secrets, some of it's people with really fertile imaginations, but then some of it that can't be explained, I think, is demonic deception.
Yeah.
There's no point in me giving the devil glory and obsessing over demonic manifestations, right?
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, there's just no point, right? I mean, if I understand theology, understand Satan has some power right now to deceive, to discourage, to torment people,
Confuse. Yeah.
confuse people. Why would I play into his um, deception by giving him a lot of glory and just obsessing over it?
Hmm.
Just say, okay, well, if somebody has a spiritual experience and the fruit of that is darkness and confusion and leads them away from the one true God, then that's not of God. So
Yeah.
I don't need to give that any more credit or credence than that. So
Yep. I just hope that when they zap us all with their lasers, it's just quick. No, I'm ready. I'm ready. Just make it quick.
yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Wow.
No, they won't do that.
What if there is life on other planets and then like we were so excited about life on other planets and then they like revealed themselves to us? This is like nothing special. It's just like humans from Arkansas or something.
They all look like Bart Simpson or something.
Yeah. Yeah, just like we're like, "Oh, that's it. What have you guys discovered?" And they're
They're
like,
all very unintelligent.
yeah, they're like, "We've discovered how to make a mailbox that has a tray that slides out when you open the door." And we're like, "That's all you have in
Yeah.
terms of technology?" Yes. And we're like, "Ugh." And we're just like super disappointed, you know?
Yeah, they like gave us hot pockets. They're like, "Remember those things? We
We're
gave
like,
those to you guys."
"You guys were trying to burn the roofs of our mouths.
Mm,
Aliens."
that's right. Hot
Man,
pockets do that.
they do that. When's the last time you had a hot pocket?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's college for me. College for me. That would have been,
It's been
yeah.
more recent for me.
Has it? Were you a ham and cheese guy or a pepperoni pizza hot pocket guy?
Probably pepperoni pizza. Yeah.
Yeah. I used to when I was getting into running, there was a guy that was in my discipleship group, Steven, and Steven was in the army, or he still is, I guess, in the Army Reserve. And before he would have to do his physicals, he would have to make sure that he could run 2 miles in a
A certain amount of
a
time.
certain amount of time. And so
Yeah.
he would be he'd call me up and be like, "Hey man, I want to run with you this week." I'm like, "Yeah, dude, sure." And he'd get off work, he would go home, he would eat like a pepperoni hot pocket and down like an energy drink, and then come and meet me on the greenway. And then true to form, after every run, he would puke.
Just puke. Yeah. I was about
Yeah,
to say.
that's the
I,
last experience I've had with
I
a hot pocket.
I think back about our college time, and I'm like, I was living off of Red Baron frozen pizzas
Ain't
and
nothing wrong with that.
and Yingling. Like that was the staple of my diet.
Two
Right?
major food groups right there. Yeah.
But I was running upwards of 30 miles a week.
Dude, you were
And
killing it in college, man. I don't know
I'm
how you
like,
did that.
well, I was just thinking, and I'd go to class all day, and then but I was like thinking, man, if I actually ate well,
Yeah,
I would have been in really good shape.
you could have qualified for the Olympics.
But it just goes to show that, yeah. I was like, I could actually run marathons. It's
Man,
just crazy how
every month we have our next class, which is kind of like our new members class here, and we just do pizza for dinner for that night.
Mhm.
And I eat pizza for next class, and I don't eat like a ton of pizza any other time. I might have it once or twice a month after that. But dude, the older I get, like if I eat a
Mhm.
pizza dinner,
Mhm.
I feel like Quickcrete is in my gut for like 24 hours.
Mm.
Like it messes me up, man. And it's so funny because I like lived off of that stuff for so long, and now it's like once a month I see that date on the calendar. I'm like, oh, okay, be ready for the bubble guts for the next 24 hours. Here we
Oh
go. So
gosh.
it's just part of growing old. And I think at this
Is this thing
point,
still recording?
I think we probably need to sign off because it's getting nutty. So anyway, hey, thank you. Big shout out to Demi Lovato and
Oh
anybody
wow.
else listening that we referenced. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And if you've got any questions, comments, cries of outrage, send us an email at beersandbiblepodcast@gmail.com, or you can reach out to us via the Facebook page. Thank you guys for listening. See you guys next time.